The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.
From St. Louis Public Radio. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Later in the hour, we'll talk with Republican Senator Nick Schroer of St. Charles County about why there should be a gubernatorially appointed board that oversees the St. Louis County Metropolitan Police Department. But first, St. Louis County Executive Sam Page has officially entered politically treacherous territory. He's leading Missouri's largest county at a time of downward population growth and an uncertain budgetary future. And for the first time since he took office in 2019, Page is facing a county council with enough antagonists to override his veto. And critics like St. Louis County Council Chairwoman Rita Days are planning to exert the council's power, particularly with a charter amendment that could allow council members to fire department directors and the county councilor.
The county executive often says publicly that he wants to work together to get things done. Yet behind closed doors, his actions tell a different story. I remain ready and willing to work earnestly with Dr. Page, but that collaboration must be a two-way street.
Earlier this week, I sat down with Page in his Clayton office. In addition to talking about his political future and his relationship with the county council, I asked him what his main priorities were before he's up for election again in 2026.
Well, we're working on our 2050 comprehensive plan, which is really a big project. It's the first time that we've had a comprehensive planning project in St. Louis County in 40 years. A lot of neighborhood engagement, a lot of community engagement, and we'll have some recommendations soon. The airport is a big deal in St. Louis County for the region. The airport is a big deal. And in addition to that process that's moving forward and being driven by the city, we're also going to be initiating a comprehensive land use plan around the airport to make sure that those municipalities are able to capitalize on the new development and make maximum use of their territory, their jurisdictions.
Because the city owns the airport, what exactly is the role of the county in the actual overhaul of the airport?
Well, the county has commissioners appointed that will participate in the conversation. The architecture and the construction is going to be driven by the city because it's a city asset. But we'll be in the conversation. But as importantly, we'll be discussing with the municipalities that touch the airport and that are in the near area about land use and about the best way to optimize their land as a new airport comes online.
I asked about what your major plans are, because from the outside looking in, you could make an argument that the county may be kind of in a muddled stagnation in terms of population, in terms of big initiatives, in terms of revenue. What would you say to that?
We've made a massive investment in public safety, unprecedented. 3 new police stations, the third one coming online here this year. We're working cooperatively with the state of Missouri and our neighboring jurisdictions to create and build a multi-jurisdictional police training center. Law enforcement and public safety is an area of great agreement. We're working cooperatively with the city of St. Louis there. There's always things to work on. Job growth, economic development are important to us. That's why we're doing a land planning study around the airport. Our economic development partnership is always busy working with our current businesses and large employers to grow and trying to attract new employers to the region.
We'll talk more about public safety later in the conversation, but one of the barriers, as you mentioned before, is money. Right. Both you and your predecessors have warned that the amount of money that the county has in reserves is running low for critical governmental services. For context, how many more years can the county dip into some of the reserves before they reach zero?
Well, we won't reach zero, but we'll reach an uncomfortable point. And we've probably got 2 or 3 years before it starts to get uncomfortable. Our reserves are built up with ARPA funds and that were appropriated to lost revenue. We have the NFL settlement funds in our reserve. So we have enough for 2 or 3 years, but it's going to get uncomfortable after that. I hope we can have a conversation with the community and the voters about a use tax, which I think would be a fair tax that most other jurisdictions have already approved. We need to make sure that there's a good working coalition in the community to get that passed, and we've been talking with some of our partners about that.
Can you explain what a use tax is and how it would be applied?
Well, it's essentially a sales tax on online purchases, from out of state. It levels the playing field between our local brick and mortar retailers and their online competition. And it's something that we've talked about for years, at least since I've been in the legislature. The state passed enabling legislation a few years ago to allow local jurisdictions to pursue this. And over the past few years, some of them have begun to adopt this legislation.
Do you know how much money a use tax would bring in to the county compared to not having one?
Well, we have estimates. We think it's $50 or $60 million a year, but it's enough to get us pretty close to closing our budget gap.
I ask this because other solutions to deal with the budget have run into barriers. Obviously, the marijuana tax situation, I think, is ensnared in court right now. Anytime you bring up property taxes, people get very cranky about it. And the use tax was put on the ballot in 2022 and it failed. So what do you make of the potential reality that any of these revenue solutions may not have overwhelming public support in order to be implemented?
Well, that's always a question whenever you talk about new revenue. And the voters in St. Louis County have to decide, and we have to help make our case, what services do you want? We've got a big investment in public safety in St. Louis County. It's half of our general fund budget, a little bit over half. And folks have come to expect and depend on St. Louis County Police Department and our public safety footprint. And I think when push comes to shove and we have these hard discussions, folks want to make sure that our county resources have the funds they need to be successful.
We ended up getting a lot of questions about some specific county services on social media. AJ Mole on X asks, why were Chesterfield streets in amazing condition after the snow ice storm while county maintained roads were treacherous? Now, I want to make it clear that St. Louis County wasn't the only governmental entity that faced criticism from people about the recent winter storm. Obviously, that happened in the city. I'm sure there were some municipalities, both here and in St. Charles County, that did better than others. But I guess my question is, why weren't regional planners and people that deal with the storm better prepared, given that there was kind of a 3 or 4 day lead time to this weather event?
Well, I can speak for St. Louis County. I know we opened our Emergency Operations Center the day before the snow came, and we're preparing for it. St. Louis County roads actually were pretty clear. Most of the time, when we had a complaint about a St. Louis County road, we learned pretty quickly that it wasn't a St. Louis County road, it was someone else's jurisdiction. In fact, at most of my press events, the comments that I received in my press conference was, can you go and help clear some of the other roads that aren't yours, because yours are pretty clear. And the folks that dug into this learned pretty quickly that our arterial roads were cleaned pretty quickly, and we did a pretty good job with them. We cleared our subdivisions at a pretty good pace that was competitive with the municipalities who got into their subdivisions. Most of my feedback that I got were, can you go and help other people clear the roads that aren't yours?
Yeah, I saw some social media commentary, especially from South County, which the county is responsible, saying, no, the county didn't do a particularly good job. I imagine, though, that the footprint is large and maybe you did good in one area and didn't do well in another area. But I guess going back to what you just mentioned, it doesn't seem from your answer that there was particularly good coordination and cooperation with MoDOT, municipalities, other counties. Was that a problem, or am I reading into that incorrectly?
Well, I don't know that historically there's been intentional coordination of plow services. Everybody knows the roads that they're responsible for, and they go and try and do them. A snowstorm is an unpredictable event. Some winters we go without much snow, and sometimes we have a record like we did recently, and we wish we could have done better. But the special combination of a layer of sleet and ice prior to the snow made it difficult to get it up, and a lot of jurisdictions struggled. I think St. Louis County did pretty well in a relatively understaffed, short budget environment, short employees. Our guys worked, men and women worked 12-hour shifts, worked overtime to get the roads cleared, and I think they did a pretty good job considering a very difficult situation.
We got several questions related to the animal shelter, including this one from Speuter, your cat STL on Instagram. That's one of my favorite parts of the show, is reading the usernames. Would love to know if Dr. Page is insisting the volunteer programs stay in place after APA leaves the county animal shelter. Volunteers donated 97,000 hours last year caring for animals in the shelter. Also, is there a long-term plan in place for constant overcrowding in that shelter? Plans to add a second shelter? One of the things I've learned from covering county government on and off for the last 11 or 12 years is there are two things that get the public very energized. One is parks, and two is the animal shelter. So I'd like you to field that question, because I'm sure there's a lot of interest in your answer.
Sure. Well, we know that St. Louis County is a community that cares very much about their animals, dogs and cats and their pets. And St. Louis County is an important partner. The APA has been a partner with us in our animal adoption program. We are reworking that relationship with the APA. We're proud of them as a partner. They'll still be a preferred adoption partner, but St. Louis County is going to run the Animal Care and Control Center starting in February. We will have a volunteer program. We're grateful for our volunteers, and we know they provide a big service for us, and we're just working on the details of what that program's going to look like.
I guess as somebody who doesn't have pets, what is the case for the county rather than like a outside organization running an animal shelter? I could certainly understand a situation like we just had where you were contracting with an agency and you provided funds, but given that we may be entering a perilous budgetary time, could it be argued that there are better, more important things to spend money on than that?
Well, it's we're going to fund and support animal care and control, and we're gonna support our animal adoption program, because that's an important core value for St. Louis County. It's more affordable to do this with county employees than it is to contract out for the services, and the APA has provided us an important service and helped us change some of our programming, and we think they've done a pretty good job. We can run it on a tighter budget ourselves, and that's what we'll do moving forward. The AP partnership will change a little bit. They'll still be a preferred adoption partner, but they won't be running the shelter.
I want to move on to the new St. Louis County prosecutor, Melissa Price Smith. You were recently entangled in a very public disagreement with Governor Mike Parson over appointing the new St. Louis County prosecutor. The courts ruled that Parson and not you could pick Wesley Bell's replacement. And while even some of your detractors felt it made sense for you to fight for your right to appoint a new prosecutor, given that Steve Ellman got to do it and the Jackson County executive did it many years ago, they also have told me that this whole situation could have been avoided if, like, hypothetically, you and Governor Parson worked out something behind the scenes. What do you kind of make of that observation?
I think it's important for St. Louis County to choose its elected leaders through a process that its voters select through their charter, and that's how it's been done for decades. It's important that that process is in place, and the Supreme Court changed decades of experience in our state. I think Melissa will be a good prosecutor. I've met with her, and we've talked about things that are in front, that services that they need and support, and she'll have my support, and I think everybody in St. Louis County should support the new prosecutor in that office. It's very important for public safety that office works.
There was this kind of subplot to this. If you had the courts had ruled in your favor. It was looking like the county council may have rejected Court Van Ostrin, and you may have had to make him acting until 2027. Maybe a court would have agreed that you were in the right there, but I've read the county charter, and the spirit of it seems to say that the county council should be able to approve and with advise and consent similar to the U.S. Senate. What would you say to people who felt like you were doing an end around the county council?
Well, I would read the county charter differently, and most of our legal experts have a different opinion, but people can read the law, read the charter, read the Missouri Constitution, and come up with different opinions, and that whole process was litigated all the way up to the Supreme Court. But we were comfortable in our legal position, and that's the path we would have chosen given the opportunity. But we have a prosecutor now, and I think it's important we get behind that person and support the office.
Prosecutor Price Smith recently told us that crime is too high in St. Louis County, citing the very big caseload assistant prosecutors have. What do you make of that?
Well, crime is too high. It's too high in our country, and it's too high in our community. It's much less than it was 2 years ago. It's going in the right direction, but we still have work to do. And our focus on public safety is our number one priority in St. Louis County, and we'll be working together with the county prosecutor to address that. We've given record resources to public safety. We're implementing new programs, new partnerships, and we're going to keep doing all of that.
Do you think that there needs to be more formalized collaborations between St. Louis County Police Department and not only municipal police departments in St. Louis County, but I know that there's probably been some in St. Louis City as well, near the border with the city. Do there need to be deeper ties there?
Well, we do have a much better working relationship with St. Louis City Police Department than we did before I became county executive. The Teneo report was important in helping us identify areas of potential cooperation and collaboration, and some of that still continues. We're working with our municipal partners. We're working to get our municipal partners using some of our tools that we use. Our case reporting system is probably the best example. We would like for all of our law enforcement agencies to be able to search the same database when they're dealing with people who are suspects, or they're trying to identify the patterns of crime in our community. But there's lots of opportunities for cooperation. We have 54 police jurisdictions in St. Louis County, and I think cooperation is an important part of what we do. We're involved in a lot of federal multi-jurisdictional task forces. The St. Louis County Police Department provides most of the legwork in those task forces, and I think that's an important part of what we do.
We need to take a quick break. When we return, we'll have more of my conversation with St. Louis County Executive Sam Page. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
If you have a smart speaker, you have access to the entire world of NPR and St. Louis Public Radio. All the latest news and all the captivating stories. Activate our voices with yours by telling your smart speaker to play St. Louis Public Radio.
Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. We now return to my conversation with St. Louis County Executive Sam Page. We recorded this interview earlier this week at his office in Clayton. I'm going to touch on the third rail of St. Louis regional politics, and that's mergers and consolidation. Do you think that it would be better for crime-fighting efforts in the region if St. Louis City's police department and St. Louis County's police department merged into one police department?
Well, my responsibility as St. Louis County, it's hard for me to advocate for mergers and acquisitions. I'm not really interested in invading or taking someone else's authority or jurisdiction. I'm interested in partnerships. I'm interested in people who will work with us voluntarily. That's my message to our municipal police departments, and that's been my track record with the City of St. Louis.
The only reason I asked that, beyond my own, perverse interest in mergers and acquisitions, is if you had a larger police department that had a larger geographic tax base, maybe you could be more efficient in, how you pay police officers or where you put them in high crime areas. But I would imagine that you probably would have to actually ask the actual police departments and the people that work there if they're interested in doing that. And I think the answer would probably be met with a lot of resistance. I feel like I'm answering my own question here, but could you kind of address sort of the pluses and minuses of that idea?
Well, I think anytime you talk about mergers and acquisitions and a vision of how you could run someone else's organization more efficiently than they do, you need to step back and make sure you're having a conversation with all the stakeholders, the people who receive those services, the people who are providing those services, the people who are paying for those services. You need to have all of the stakeholders aligned before you pursue any sort of acquisition.
So let's talk about the quote-unquote fun part of your job, dealing with the St. Louis County Council. You've reached a point where you only have one member who I would consider friendly or an ally to you, Councilwoman Lisa Clancy. The rest are either openly hostile to you or at best skeptical. I would say there's probably enough critical mass to override some of your vetoes now, which wasn't the case in 2024. How do you plan to navigate this?
Well, we're going to focus on the areas of agreement. We'll have vibrant conversations and communications when we disagree, and in areas of agreement, we'll work together to make things better in St. Louis County. That's what we did last night. We passed legislation to allow for outside counsel to put together this multi-jurisdictional police training center, which is a very big idea and it's very important to the region. And I think you'll see us work together on areas of agreement, and you'll see us have difficult conversations when we don't agree.
I think there's a broader question of how you got here that I want you to respond to. I've heard from several current and former council members that they feel that your communication with them has been lacking. And sure, I could read you a quote from one of your antagonists like Dennis Hancock or Mark Harder or Rita Days, but I'm actually going to read you something from Kelly Dunaway, who called you a mentor in past interviews. She said to me last year, quote, "I share similar frustrations with the county executive from time to time, and I consider him a friend, and he leaves me out of the loop. And sometimes I find out about things that affect my district in the paper or when a reporter calls me, and I'm like, I couldn't even get a heads up. I get it, but this is a bridge too far for me." Why does this keep happening?
Well, I think it's difficult to tell our council members everything that's always going on, and it's certainly frustrating for them to hear something in the news. We do the best we can to keep them informed. I would love to be able to have more frequent meetings and more frequent conversations, but I think the way this has evolved is it's difficult to get folks to agree to sit down and talk. I think we're in a little better place now, but we'll keep pushing forward on areas of agreement. I think that this is all driven by a very difficult point in history where budgets are tight and folks have expectations for things that they want to see happen, things that they want to do. Some of those are new programs, but we have to focus first on providing the core services in St. Louis County that people have come to expect. And difficult conversations around the budget really create a lot of frustration.
And, I'm not naive to this. I know that sometimes council members take shots at you for political purposes. Sure. But I'd like to ask you about your culpability in this. There's probably been instances where you have supported people that lost elections and the person that won don't trust you. Gretchen Bangert is probably a good example of that. Is this kind of a breakdown that has origins not just with a council that wants to exert its own authority, but maybe your wrong or seemingly ham-fisted political choices?
Well, you can use whatever narrative you want to describe winners and losers of elections and people who support people who win and lose. That's the system that we have. Some of my strongest political relationships are people that I wasn't for in an election at one point or weren't for me. I think you keep talking to people who you weren't with at one point in time. All these relationships realign every 2 years with every political cycle. These aren't permanent. You have to have conversations. You have to agree to work together when you agree, and you see where your relationships go. There are no permanent enemies in the political process.
There's no permanent enemies, no permanent allies, only permanent interests, which was popularized by former Congressman Bill Clay, but I don't think he came up with that. That was, I think, something from antiquity. Earlier this week, the council passed a measure that could make it easier for them to fire department heads and the county council. You're planning to veto it. Why?
Well, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it's fair for our department heads to feel threatened if they don't agree with a request or direction from a council member. It's important in a charter form of government that our department heads know the lines of authority. Our council members are in a position to ask for help with things and have priorities, and we work through all of those, but they can't give direction to our department heads. I'm not familiar with any situation where they didn't get information that they needed in a relatively timely fashion. Sometimes we can't get it done the same day. The only conflict that I'm really aware of that's frustrated them is a high-profile problem with the nepotism case that was reported by our county councilor, and I know that frustrated them, and that whole process frustrated them.
And just for our listeners, the nepotism case you're referring to is the still ongoing legal fight about whether Councilman Dennis Hancock should be ousted from office for hiring his stepdaughter. There is enough support, though, to override your veto for this. And assuming it makes the ballot in April, if it passes, is that a repudiation of your leadership? Or is it just people deciding that it's a good idea, basically?
Well, it's a very clear effort to gain authority over department heads, and that is going to be difficult for our department heads who have to make tough decisions. I would hate to see our county councilor put in a position of being fired by a council when she reported wrongdoing. I think that's a bad dynamic.
Another idea that's been floated that is probably not going to be on the ballot this time, but maybe in the future, is having a county manager take over day-to-day functions of overseeing county government. Now, you've served on the city council in a city with a city manager. You were Creve Coeur city councilman many, many years ago. And, from the outside looking in, that city seems to be functioning fine. So why not implement that system in St. Louis County?
Well, St. Louis County is a much bigger animal than a municipality. It's an interesting question. St. Louis County is essentially a small state.
Yeah.
And it's better if the voters get to elect the chief executive, get to remove the chief executive, get to put someone there who aligns with their philosophy and can produce in the way they would want them to produce. Creve Coeur also has a very interesting provision in their charter, and it's a non-interference clause, and it prevents their council members from giving direction to department heads. The spectrum of council members' relationship with department heads is all over the place in municipal government, from non-interference to removal. But I believe in our charter form of government, we're essentially running a small state, and our department heads need to be protected from retribution.
To play devil's advocate, wouldn't having a county manager relieve you from the day-to-day minutia of managing county government and allow you to focus more on sort of big-ticket policy ideas?
Well, it would remove a lot of authority from the county executive, and it would essentially mean that the voters don't pick the chief executive anymore, the council does. It's a very different form of government. And, it's not a good way to run a big operation like St. Louis County, the largest jurisdiction in the state.
Do you still like doing this job?
This really is a very rewarding job. I think if you look at government in general, St. Louis County, state government, federal government, we're watching what's happening in Washington this week, there's a lot of conflict in the air. There's a lot of frustrations, but you have to look past that and focus on your goals and get your work done.
Have you made any decisions about whether you will run for another full term in 2026?
I'm planning on running again in 2026. I'll make a formal announcement later this year, as we usually do in the normal election cycle. But I've been reelected twice to St. Louis County, and I still enjoy a pretty significant support in the community. I stay connected to the voters. And, not everyone likes the decision that I make every day or any chief executive makes every day. I think you have to work through those and stay focused on the big picture.
That was St. Louis County Executive Sam Page, who was appointed to his post in 2019. He won election to a partial term in 2020 and a full 4-year term in 2022. Coming up, we'll speak with a Republican senator about why a gubernatorial board should oversee the St. Louis Police Department. This is the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. Welcome back to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jason Rosenbaum. Missouri Republicans are stepping up efforts to place a board full of gubernatorial appointees in charge of overseeing the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. This would be a massive change, as voters in 2012 approved a plan effectively giving the St. Louis mayor's office oversight over the law enforcement agency. Unsurprisingly, this plan is drawing a sharp rebuke from high-level St. Louis leaders. During a Senate committee hearing earlier this week in Jefferson City, St. Louis Mayor Tashara Jones condemned GOP State Senator Nick Schroer's bill as unnecessary and unfair.
State control over our police department was a failure. It was a failure that the voters rejected, and if this body holds respect for facts and best practices, it should fail to move beyond this committee.
So could this be an example of a solution in search of a problem, or could this gubernatorial board really enhance public safety throughout St. Louis? Joining us now to talk about this bill is State Senator Nick Schroer, who represents a portion of St. Charles County in the Missouri Senate. Senator, welcome to the Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. And I apologize right now if anybody can hear some road noise. I'm coming back from the Capitol.
Before we talk about the arguments for and against your bill, can you explain who would be on the board overseeing the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department and, particularly who would appoint them to that position?
Well, that's a great question. And the different iterations of this bill, year after year, it's kind of changed the dynamic of who would be on there. But the one thing that remains constant is the mayor would be on it. The governor would pick from a slate of different candidates, and I'll kind of differentiate the two different routes that we have gone. But ultimately, they're going to be citizens in the city of St. Louis. So the current bill that we have right now essentially groups the fraternal groups in policing. You've got the POA, Police Officers Association. You've got ESOP, the Ethical Society of Police, which historically, you look back in time, and they typically don't agree on big controversial issues when it comes to combating crime and different tactics. But on this one, they are 100% in line with this bill that this has to get done. But essentially, they would get to pick the different candidates that the governor would choose from outside of the mayor, and they would be the ones that are on the board. They're going to be, community leaders. They're going to be experts in law enforcement. But they have to be. The one thing that we've wanted this is a citizen board control where citizens have a stake in the game, where community policing is enacted with police working with these community leaders, and that's what we're getting with this bill.
So under this setup, though, when the governor still makes the ultimate decision on who's on this board, would the state then be responsible for paying for things that the board approves, like legal-related expenses or new equipment or requests for more people? Or would that be still the city of St. Louis's responsibility to pay for those things?
Well, there's going to be buy-in from the state on many things. We heard the Attorney General's staff came in saying that the Legal Defense Fund would be extended to them once this bill goes through, and protecting a lot of law enforcement from different lawsuits and representing them in those manners. Now, there was a provision in the bill, which is going to remain in there, discussing the state responsible for all of the indebtedness and contracts that are out there. And we're trying to finalize some language as well, looking at the funding issues that we saw in Kansas City, the response to threats of defunding the police, and trying to make sure that once this is set up, that the city can't just say, well, we're not going to send any funding whatsoever. So there is going to be funding mechanisms from the state and from the city itself.
I think that the biggest question that both proponents and opponents of this idea are asking is, Why do you think this method of overseeing the police department would make St. Louis safer than it is today?
Well, and it's a great question. And, when I was in college, I studied criminology and criminal justice. I lived in Ferguson, Missouri for many years. Even after we moved into another city, Florissant in North County, my wife and I, when we were dating, we ended up moving back to Ferguson for a while. So this is an area where it's really impacted me, my friends, my businesses that I worked for. And I've been studying this issue for a very long time, working with law enforcement. And number one, when all of these different groups, which historically aren't agreeing on certain topics, are coming to the table, not only is it ESOP and the POA and the FOP, we've got the Police Chiefs Organization who testified in support of this bill as well, and the Law Enforcement Legislative Coalition. So all of the people who are putting their lives on the line day in, day out are saying this is the solution. Let us get back to a board of experts, a board of citizens to govern us instead of political folks who are injecting politics into policy. And I have asked this question. Okay, well, what's the difference, as you've heard from Senator Barbara Washington, who's a good friend of mine. She's a Democrat in Kansas City, but she was asking that they've got board control. How is this going to be different? And, going back historically speaking to the residency requirement repeal, we were told as Republicans, you cannot compare and contrast Kansas City to St. Louis. And there's a whole slew of reasons why, whether it's the Kansas City has 200K more population than St. Louis. Kansas City is still growing. St. Louis is bleeding population. The prosecutorial issues, there's a number of them. But how is this going to help? Essentially, it is getting buy-in from experts in the field, community policing, getting people that are going to have the police's backs and listen to them when it comes to the resources and the tools that they need.
You mentioned Kansas City and kind of your wariness of comparing St. Louis to Kansas City because they're different sizes, there's different population trends, but there is kind of one common denominator. The mayors of St. Louis and Kansas City do not like the concept of having a gubernatorially appointed board overseeing their police department. Here is a clip from a 2023 episode of St. Louis on the Air with Kansas City Mayor Quinton Lucas expressing his disdain for this setup.
Right now in Kansas City, we're on pace to have our most, and sadly, most violent year in terms of homicides. In St. Louis, I've seen numbers that suggest that we're seeing homicide trends that have dropped by 25% between 2020 and 2021. Right? There are things that are working. You have new leadership. So why change? What is actually the rationale for change other than what I would believe is, unfortunately, a far right-wing conservative power grab to try to take away actually the voices of the people of St. Louis?
That was Kansas City Mayor Quinton Lucas on a 2023 episode of St. Louis on the Air. What's your response to Mayor Lucas's comments there?
Well, of course, I disagree with him. This is not, some conservative power grab. This is listening to the people at the many town halls that I've done in the city of St. Louis. And my good friend Ty Dennis, who started Clippers and Cops, he was a St. Louis resident, became an officer in Atlanta and Georgia, and trying to bring the police and the people back together, started this Clippers and Cops, which is now expanded in the city of St. Louis. And we're listening to the people loud and clear. We're listening to the residents. I even had several calls into my office of St. Louis city residents adamantly supporting this bill, saying that there's zero trust in Tashara Jones' administration when it comes to trash pickup, when it comes to cleaning up the streets, when it comes to public safety. But I disagree with him on his assessment that this is all politics. No, it's quite the contrary. We're trying to get politics out of policing and let the experts do what they do best and clean up our streets so we can compete with areas like Nashville, Tennessee, Austin, Texas, and many others that are similarly situated. So as of right now, the status quo is not working. We're bleeding population, we're bleeding businesses, and ultimately when you look as a policymaker, what impact is that having when our number one region for economic growth, economic vitality, general revenue funds that are coming from the city of St. Louis, they're depleting. And the impact that that's going to have long term if we continue the status quo and continue just letting this problem further devolve, it's going to have huge implications on what we can do as a state, the services that are offered, and the future of Missouri.
Now, before I ask this question, I do want to point out that there are a number of elected officials in the city of St. Louis that do not like the current setup and would like to go to your bill. And as you mentioned, both the St. Louis Police Officers Association and the Ethical Society of Police, which represents primarily African-American officers, are in support of this. So I want that caveat to be out there before I ask this question. But it is noticeable to me that people who are sponsoring this bill are not from the city of St. Louis and are from places like St. Charles County, or in Senator Travis Fitzwater's case, Callaway County. And I think opponents would see that reality as evidence that people not from St. Louis City are trying to micromanage St. Louis City. Yeah. What would you say to that?
Well, it is a valid concern, and that's where I've shared my history and my story with a lot of these people that I consider friends. That they might disagree with this bill, but they have to learn that I grew up minutes from the Arch in Ferguson, Missouri, right next to Emerson Electric. I still have plenty of family and friends and colleagues on both sides of the aisle that live in St. Louis City, that live in St. Louis County. I've got many constituents that have left the city of St. Louis in recent years and have moved into St. Charles County. And just listening to the people on the ground, listening to the men and women in law enforcement who have said, we've tried to talk to other senators in the past. We've tried to talk to other state representatives in the past. And I think somebody alluded to that in one of the hearings, either on the House side or the Senate side, that it is a shame when St. Louis City senators and state representatives have not listened to the men and women in law enforcement who so adamantly want this. So, no, it's not necessarily a concern that I think has any legs, because we're handing this back to the people in the city of St. Louis to govern over the Metropolitan Police Department. So even though we may live a little bit, 20, 30 miles away from where they do in the city of St. Louis, we're still listening to their citizens, and we're putting this back in their hands to be on this board to take politics out of policing.
I guess I asked this question because it seems to be a trend in the relationship between state government and St. Louis County. I mean, we just went through a situation recently in St. Louis County where Governor Parson insisted that he and not County Executive Page should appoint Wesley Bell's replacement. And yet he didn't make any such objection when Steve Ellman appointed Tim Lomar's replacement as prosecutor. So what would you say that this is just another example of the state treating St. Louis and St. Louis County differently than large Republican-led counties like St. Charles County?
Yeah, and that is a valid point as well. And I do think that there should be more of a consistency. I did kind of scratch my head when that happened. I'm like, well, why was it okay replacing my good friend Tim Lomar's replacement? McCullough has been phenomenal for St. Charles County. But when you look at the crime statistics in the city of St. Louis, in St. Louis County, there is a different dynamic. There is a tougher on crime approach, maintenance of law and order in St. Charles County that you're not seeing and you haven't seen in recent years under Wesley Bell and Kim Gardner. But it's something that I think you'd have to ask Mike Parson why he didn't step in on the St. Charles County replacement, and he did on St. Louis. I will say his pick is phenomenal in both St. Louis City and St. Louis County. I know the question was asked yesterday about state intervention. When has it worked before? And I pointed to Kim Gardner with the state intervening and replacing her with Gabe Gore, who's done a great job so far.
I think it's important to explain how we got to this point, because St. Louis used to have a gubernatorial board overseeing the police department up until 2012. And voters passed a ballot item putting the current system in place. And the person that funded that measure was Rex Sinquefield, who has given millions of dollars to help Republican and Democratic candidates. And I'm going to be really honest with you, Senator. It is a little odd to me that the momentum to pass this bill is coming when there is a mayor in place that did not receive donations or did not support a lot of Sinquefield initiatives. Like Mayor Slay was a big Sinquefield benefactor. Lyda Crewson supported a lot of Sinquefield's ideas, and Tashara Jones doesn't. And suddenly this idea is on the fast track. Should I take off my tinfoil hat here, or am I on to something about why this has more momentum than usual?
No, I think there's another time and place for a tinfoil hat. This one is not it. I think it's really simple. You mentioned all of those different mayors, whether it was Slay, Bosley, Lyda Crewson. They actually supported the police. They worked with the police. And I remember Lyda Crewson testifying when I was in the House, testifying against the residency repeal. And then the next year she came up and even told me that she had changed her mind. She had worked with law enforcement to figure out a way to better recruitment and retention. So all of those different mayors in my lifetime at least had a working relationship with police or supported police. And now we have a mayor who legitimately campaigned on defunding the police. And, the crime statistics have gotten worse. Recruitment, retention has gotten worse. We have now under 900 officers, which just a couple of years ago, there were over 1,200. 200 of those, 200 plus, are actually eligible for retirement today. So this is a dire straits moment where, it can get worse, and we have to stop the bleeding immediately and try to save this region and make it safe for everyone.
I did a quick Google search, and I saw in 2021 that Jones wanted to take, I think, $4 million out of the police department and put it toward things like affordable housing, hiring social workers and clinicians. But the reality on the ground is police officers have received significant salary increases, and the mayor just announced with the police union that they're going to get an even larger salary increase soon. So let's take aside the rhetoric. Hasn't the reality shown that the Jones administration has done the opposite of defunding the police by giving police officers more money?
Well, when you look at the budgets over the past couple of years, and we've talked about this in the Senate hearings, when you look at the budgets proposed by the mayor, you might see more money going to law enforcement, what she's claiming is law enforcement. When you dig down deep into it, you're taking a ton of money away from patrol and diverting a lot of that money to these social programs that we know don't necessarily work, are not curbing crime. I mean, look at Cure Violence, for example, and all of the money that was wasted into a program that was, stocked with criminals and has a Netflix-esque type of story behind it. And rather than giving the tools to law enforcement that they were asking for, there's more talk of, well, let's put the cameras, the red light cameras up. Let's do these social work programs where these social workers are saying, well, if I'm going to a domestic, I want police there with me. So you're actually increasing the job that they're going to have to do with less resources. So I am glad she kind of backed off of some of these things that she knew was not going to be dealt well in the public eye with the $4 million defunding. But she did get rid of, immediately after she was elected, got rid of several of the positions, many of the positions that were not filled, that were supposed to be filled with repealing the residency requirement. So, no, I would still say, even though she has not been as vocal when it comes to defunding the police, when you look at the actual statistics of her budget, she's just doing that as well.
Democrats in the Senate are probably going to filibuster your bill. How do you plan to navigate around their opposition, which I think has pretty much sunk similar efforts in the recent past?
Yeah, and it's just being with them and talking to them about their priorities and connecting them with many of the people that are in the region that I've met at town halls. One of these young ladies, just 2 years ago, I had met at one of the town halls. She lives in the city of St. Louis. She went to Lincoln University, and I actually had her as one of my interns my first year. But connecting them with the residents who are begging for this, connecting them with, and if they're senators for the city of St. Louis or around, connecting them with the police that put their lives on the line to protect those constituents, and just seeing, is there anything legislatively that we can do to make this better, to alleviate any of your concerns, showing any of the statistics from ESOP or the POA that show that this is the right move, and just doing what a senator should be doing, and that's the hard work, going into meetings with them and trying to negotiate a better bill.
Senator Nick Schroer represents Missouri's 2nd Senatorial District, which takes in a portion of St. Charles County. Senator, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Politically Speaking Hour on St. Louis on the Air is produced by Jason Rosenbaum, Alex Hoyer, Emily Woodbury, Danny Wysentowski, Maya Norfleet, and Elaine Cha. Audio engineering and sound design by Aaron Dorr. The politics editor is Fred Ehrlich, and our production intern is Roche Hemmings.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.